Hello, hello. Welcome back, everybody. Back at it with another video. I know it's been a long time since my last one, but today I'm going to be talking about the new Assassin's Creed Valhalla, and I'm going to be talking about it. I'm not really going to be reviewing it or comparing it to any of the other games or anything like that. I'm just going to talk about it, and then at the end, I'm going to decide whether I think that the game is worth it or not, all right? So how I'm going to do this, I'm going to try to split it up into sections, but it's not really going to be super structured. I'll just kind of talk about a few points that I have. I have a whole script in front of me, so I'll try to do it in one take if I can. So there's a few things to remember. None of these clips are my own, okay? I did not record the whole, 70-something hours of me playing, so I'll take the clips from someone else, and I'll make sure to credit them throughout the video, okay? So I don't know how long it's going to take. I'm just going to start talking. So I'll start with the narrative or the story first. So basically, it's very messy, all right? It's very jumbled. There's long side quests, in the game, like these long conquest pledges that you have to do, and overall it's really just too long. Like the game's like 60-70 hours. Like that's just too long for a game like this, and the story is just not connected well. Each thing feels really separate. You have to conquer each area of England, and the story is they're pretty separated, and they're hard to differentiate sometimes. So for each pledge, some of the plots are interesting, but often they end with any real connection. Some hit, some don't, and they don't really connect that much to the overarching story, okay? They try to connect it, but it doesn't work as well as I think it could. Some characters show up again, but, you last saw them, right when you started the game, so you don't really remember them, and you don't really have a real connection. So really, when you do that, when you do these side quests, for all these characters that you see, you either A, never see them again, B, they die, C, they show up later in the story, or D, they show up later in the story and die. All right, there's really no in between. Some of them do end up coming to live with you, at the settlement, but they're never really fully fleshed out characters, and the game never really gives you any real incentive to interact with them after that. They do have pretty interesting historical figures like King Alfred the Great and the Ragnar sons of Ragnar. Lothbrok, who's not even in the game. I don't understand how you can do that. They do talk about him, though, but he's not in it personally. And then, and even then, a lot of these characters are pretty, bland. So for the Ragnar sons, they made Halfdan this, paranoid mess. Ivar was just a bloodthirsty psycho. And they killed Ubba off-screen, one of the most legendary Vikings ever. They just killed off screen. I don't know how you can do that. But aside from that, there are characters that I did really like. First of all, the main character Eivor, I think is a great protagonist. I liked him a lot. His brother Sigurd, very good. I think he was a great character as well. And King Alfred actually surprised me. He was a very good character. I thought he kind of stole every cutscene with him in it. I enjoyed him a lot, but even then, two of those, Sigurd and King Alfred, they're only in the game for little spurts, and you don't really get to interact with them as much as you could have, or as much as I would have really liked. I'll never forget in the story, there was this big emotional scene where Sigurd gets kidnapped by King Alfred, and it was the climax of the story, the biggest point, and I was the most engaged in it that I had been in the whole game. But then the story never continues from that for 20 more hours. You have to play 20 more hours before you can finally figure out what happened. And then even then, it's just a small, continuation of that story. And then you have to play even more before you finally rescue him. And by that point, there isn't much incentive to actually keep going. I was pretty disengaged with the story. And one thing though, the ending of the game was actually really good. They did a very good job with that. Especially the ending with King Alfred. Again, they are kind of separated, like it was in Assassin's Creed Odyssey. But one thing that did annoy me a bit and took me out of it was the side quest when you had to go to Asgard and Jotunheim, which you didn't actually go. Obviously, they were just visions, but those, I believe, were really annoying because, first of all, they just kind of drop you in. You're completely different characters, everything. It's hard to follow sometimes, and I believe it should have been a DLC because these quests just extend the game longer than than the game already is, and finding out what happened, because it's really just kind of like a flashback to like way back in time, and what happened then would have been, because you would have been really confusing about the ending without it. So it would have been cool to have that as a DLC, one, for incentive to actually play it, and two, to actually see what happened and to really flesh out all of the characters and get a more detailed recap. But they didn't, like they did the same kind of thing with the DLC in Origins and Assassin's Creed Odyssey. So I don't know why they changed it for this one and just made the game seem very bloated. There are actually multiple endings to this game too, which brings me to another one of my major complaints, which are the dialogue options. They're just useless. Okay, they don't matter. They aren't as bad as they were in Odyssey when it was like every single line, but they are still annoying. So only a few of them actually affect anything in the game, but at the end of the game, you can just pick one of the options and then you can just get the good ending anyway. So they're just all meaningless, and they could have spent more time actually creating good and clever dialogue for all the cutscenes to just make it make more sense. And half the time you pick the options, your character just cycles through all of them in the conversation anyway. So what I mean is that you pick something and say something, then the NPC says something, then you just say one of the other answers that you could have picked before back to them. So if that makes sense. So you basically are just going through all the options that you could have chose anyway for no reason. And also the options aren't even really accurate to what they say either. Like for this one, for example, he's going to say to Halfdan, "You are insane." Like that's a pretty heavy thing to say to someone, and yet he says something completely different.
Halfdan, stop! This is a man of honor. You stand beside this traitor? I do. Let truth guide us here, not madness.
And I don't know why, like that was not the same at all, and it was actually a pretty meaningful and well-meaning response. So I don't know why, like I don't know, it's just not the same thing. And the reason why I played this clip is to show that these options should not be in the game, and that Ubisoft is really just giving us, the player, the illusion of thinking we control what happens, when in reality we don't. The choices don't matter, and they're just trying to be more of that RPG style when they don't really need to, and they could have focused more on creating these quality character moments without us having to choose. So also, speaking of player choice, this is going to be a small topic too. They let us choose the male or female character like they did in Odyssey. And, the voice actors are a lot better this time, but I think it should have been Eivor, because it makes more sense since he's like the Odin reincarnation. So it would be a male, and like, I just think he did a way better performance too. And when I'm thinking of a Viking, I'm not really thinking of a female, not to be sexist, but I do like Eivor more, and I'm always going to pick Eivor, even though I do think Cassandra should have been the main character for Assassin's Creed Odyssey, though, if that means anything. So, done with that. Next up, I want to talk about the map itself. So, I don't think the map is bad, per se. Like, I don't think any of the games in this series are bad, or the maps. But it seemed like England was like a little bland, if that makes sense. Like the map has like a lot of empty patches of just like farmland and like all these little like towns that all kind of feel the same. And the locations don't feel too distinct. Like you have pretty detailed cities and like really good views and landscapes and historical landmarks. But you have to go through all of this, empty area to finally get there. And it seemed like half of the viewpoints were just on these like broken down towers that were just copy and pasted from one location to another. And it just kind of took me out of it. Like how many of these broken towers do they think that there are in this one in just England? Like that makes no sense. So I know that the world is incredibly detailed too and has all these, NPCs, going about their daily lives and all that stuff. But that seems to be in every game now. And we can't really give them a pass for putting that in when it's lacking so much in the other areas, okay? And when we explore other aspects of the open world, there are a lot of things that are hit and miss. So your hub world, if you can really call it, is your settlement, which you can upgrade by going on raids and collecting supplies. With these supplies, you can build and upgrade your settlement, which unlocks things in-game, like a tattoo shop and a stable that you otherwise wouldn't get. which gives you incentive to go out and collect these materials and go on these raids. And for the most part, these raids are fun and definitely a highlight of the game. They vary enough in location and in difficulty to make each one seem unique. That they aren't perfect, but they create enough variation to make me want to continue, trying to upgrade my settlement and go on these raids. But moving on from that, there are also side activities that can give you access to some unique items and gear. Like you can find all these little tablets to unlock Excalibur and fight the daughters of Lyrion to unlock Thor's hammer, which is really cool. You can also hunt legendary animals and get them displayed in your longhouse, and do these parkour puzzles to unlock the true real ending of the game, which is fun. And these activities are pretty unique and are very refreshing compared to some of the bland and disengaging storylines. But of course, these also aren't perfect, as there are plenty of side activities that are just useless or provided no real incentive for me to actually complete. There are these cursed artifacts all around the map, but as far as I know, they don't actually do anything or give you anything interesting for actually destroying them. They also have these world events, which are basically this game's version of those small side missions. And while they're not bad per se, I just had no motivation to actually complete them because I was so bogged down with how long this game was. And there are also the main collectibles in the game that you collect. Like they have these ingots that vary in rarity to upgrade your gear. The gear is hidden in specific chests. So you can use those. One thing I want to talk about real quick too is the flighting. It kind of goes back to the dialogue options that there was that I talked about before, but these are fun. That they're like kind of like rap battles, like old rap battles, if that makes sense. Old timey rap battles, and they help you get charisma. But the thing is charisma doesn't do much because again, it goes into those useless dialogue options that doesn't really affect anything. So was kind of a letdown as well. Another very big change is that the special abilities that you can use in combat that was introduced in Assassin's Creed Odyssey, they're now found around the map as collectibles instead of upgradable in the skill tree. Now, the skill tree is something that I also want to touch on, but first I want to talk about something that probably annoyed me the most in this game, and it's how every single chest, everything was just ridiculously difficult to get to. Everything is behind these barred doors, locked doors, and these stupid explosive walls that you need to find these little red jars just to throw at them so you can actually get the thing. And even the small chests with the materials that you need to upgrade all your gear, you have to navigate this labyrinth just to open it, only to realize that whatever piece of gear or ability that you just unlocked is just terrible, and you just wasted your time. Like, this is peak Ubisoft. Like, it was driving me crazy the whole time. Like, they're not that bad and that hard to figure out, but they're just minor inconveniences, and they just drove me crazy, and they did not have to be there at all, I don't think. But speaking of the skill tree and the customization in general, it's just a mess. Now, I'm not sure why they changed the abilities to being on the map, but it was not a good change. And because you don't know which one you're getting, and that limits the player choice that they're are supposedly priding themselves on. The skill tree now is just gigantic, with most of the skill points being used to give you small stat increases that aren't even noticeable. Things like +5 health or -1 weight. They're just meaningless and don't seem to impact you at all. And after you get enough of those upgrades, you can get a bigger upgrade that vary a lot in quality. Like, for example, some are just completely overpowered, like the one that slows time when you dodge, or the one that regains your health when you hit the enemy back. And the system just seems very artificial, and it does not feel as rewarding to level your guy up. But speaking of that, it is a lot easier to level up than in Odyssey, and it gives you 2 skill points every time too. And it's also on a fixed level, so you only need the same XP every time, like 5,000 or something. So it doesn't increase as you get a higher level. But sometimes it takes too long for the missions to finally give you XP. And a lot of things don't give you XP, like finding all these codex pages in these hidden assassin bureaus, which is actually a really cool part of the game. I forgot to talk about those earlier. It gives you a Gives you a Bayek Easter egg, which is pretty cool. But it doesn't give any XP though, for no reason. So this whole thing that you're supposed to collect, it just gives you no XP. And it's also a lot higher of a level 2. I think it's like I think in Odyssey it's like a level 50 cap, where on Valhalla it's like 200 or something, just insane. So yeah, that's just something that I wanted to talk about quickly. Now on to the character customization. They continued from Odyssey that each piece of gear you can kind of upgrade. Now I'm not a huge fan of that, but I don't have like a huge problem. So you upgrade all your gear instead of having like a fixed outfit that you can wear. So one thing I do have a problem with is that once you spend the materials to upgrade a piece of gear, you can't like disassemble them and get them back. It's just stuck in that state forever, and you have to go out and go to those chests and find more. Okay, I remember like in Origins, if you didn't need that gear anymore, you can just disassemble it and then get those materials back to upgrade something that you want. But you can't do that now, which just kind of limits that, you know, choice, that freedom that I wish that we could have had more of. Now, also the gear has certain alignments that are supposedly different and give stealth or combat bonuses, but these differences are so minuscule that I didn't even bother focusing on them. You can also find little tattoo designs and ship designs, but these are pretty standard, and I don't have much to say about them. Now, it's time to get into the combat, because I know this is a big deal. It's a big thing for a lot of people. Now, you can actually have a shield in this game again, which is pretty good, and every single weapon can be dual wielded, including shields, which is, you know, pretty interesting. Now, the system is relatively unchanged, with it still basically just being, you know, dodge and hit until they die. But some weapons do seem to be a lot more effective. Like the spears just seem to be ridiculous. Like I was using Odin's spear for a while, and it just seemed to be unfair compared to the other other weapons in the game. I also used Thor's hammer, which was pretty ridiculous, but it did have a smaller hit range, which I could notice compared to the spear. So in contrast, I was pretty underwhelmed with Excalibur and all of the great swords for that matter, as they just seemed to move really slow and not deal enough damage, which was a bit disappointing. Some items do have unique characteristics, though. Like Excalibur would occasionally blind your enemies, and Thor's hammer would send out an electric charge as you upgrade. And as you upgraded them, they continued to gain these unique abilities, each one of your weapons. You can also put these things called runes on the weapons, which overall don't really do anything. They just seem like another action RPG element that they just threw in for the sake of it and gave mostly meaningless stat upgrades. Also, if you want to unsocket them and put them on a different piece of gear, you have to go through your entire list and select that specific one just to remove it. Another frustrating aspect of this game. The enemies do vary as you fight them, some having gold names and carrying different weapons and giving you a unique animation when you finish them, which can be pretty cool. And health is also different, as you need to eat food and collect rations and eat them in order to restore your health, as there's no health regeneration after you leave combat or when you're in combat. Now, moving on to stealth, this is definitely the most neglected aspect of the game in my opinion. First of all, there is no real incentive to be stealthy, as just hacking through the crowds is the most effective method anyway. And when you whistle, the entire camp seems to come to your hiding spot, and enemies can spot you pretty much instantly, even through walls. They do have convenient environmental traps that are pretty cool, but they seem to be few and far between. Social stealth also makes a return, which continues to be one of my least favorite aspects of all these games, as you have to limit your playstyle in order to not get spotted, or you just have to kill all the guards and move on anyway. You can sit on a bench to blend in, but I felt no real need to ever do that. All in all, it's just another mild inconvenience that just seems to be thrown in to try to please longtime fans of the series. The parkour system also came across as just lazy, as it seemed to move very slow, and my guy would just kind of not move from certain areas and just kind of sit there hanging. You can supposedly climb anything until a certain point, and then you have to slightly reposition yourself just to keep going. And in a series that focuses so much on movement, this was a bit of a disappointment. Before we end the video, I'll have to talk about the massive glitchy elephant in the room that can't quite spawn in properly. The bugs in this game are just atrocious and inexcusable for a game of this popularity. My horse would just be fidgeting constantly, making it almost impossible to climb on top of it. One time I just started swimming. I just kind of walked into an area, then my guy did the swimming animation. I did this mission with this guy where we had to go to a safe point, but instead of running or riding a horse, he just kind of walked all the way there. Now, if you're wondering how much slower walking is to running, I can assure you it is much slower. One time I caught in my ship by a cliff, and my game just started lagging so hard as my ship just clipped through the cliff slowly. And sometimes Eivor just wouldn't swing his weapons and just kind of run around like a dumbass. There would be random NPCs just in front of the characters during a cutscene, so I just couldn't see them talking. Like it would even matter, because half the time that the characters' mouths wouldn't even move when they talked, just diminishing what little quality this story had to begin with. And the load times in this game are insane. I saw a review, I think on IGN, where this dude said the load times are super short, and I want to know what game he was playing, because they took a while, and you have to fast travel a lot. This is a large map. Sometimes it would take so long that my game would just crash. It just couldn't comprehend it. It just couldn't run what was happening. And keep in mind, I was playing this game, 1, 2, 3 months after the initial release, so there really is no excuse for the game to function like this. Now, I do want to talk about how I think this game could have improved, because I do think it was a little underdeveloped. Like the story, for example, like when you're in this dream world with Sigurd, he kind of opens up on how he feels like this is the only world where he belongs to, as he left Norway and was losing his French and was losing his leadership in England. But this was just kind of brushed over in favor of Eivor banishing Odin, which was a pretty great character moment in its own right. But my whole point is that all of the story moments that I actually cared about only equal to about 10 hours of the 70 hours you have to play. A way that I think could have improved this is to just get rid of the level system. So all it does is handicap the player hunting for XP instead of really focusing on the story or the gameplay. Also, to revamp the combat system, instead of just dodge and hit, they could make it more like Unity, where you need to dodge and deflect with timing and more skill, and the different weapon types provide different advantages and disadvantages. They could also either make the pledges and conquering England a completely separate story and side quest to tie it in with the main characters more, like they did with Origins, to make it more cohesive. The main story with these main characters needed to be explored more to truly make the story feel like it has weight and meaning. Instead of just leaving for 5 hours to do something completely unrelated, have the unrelated pledge or activity directly relate and affect the characters that you started with and have grown attached to. Now, that's about all I'm going to say right now. That's a whole other video that I can make talking about how I think the game could have been better. So to wrap up, I know you guys, after hearing me talk about this game, think I just hated it, but I actually did enjoy myself a lot while playing. I love the settlement and raids and hunting legendary animals, exploring these caves to find these tablets to literally pull the sword from the stone and collect all through his armor to gain access to his hammer. I love the animus anomalies that made you do these parkour challenges to unlock the true ending. There's so many great things here, but there's so many things wrong with it, like a disconnected narrative, the unbalanced combat, the tedious level system, and the unrelenting amount of bugs and frustrating aspects that prevented me from really getting into this game. The big question is now, if you're a fan of the series or just like these type of games, if you should give it a shot and go out and play this game. And honestly, my answer will be no. Too many parts of this game do not work, and by trying to please both longtime fans and a casual audience, they ended up pleasing neither, and we're just left with this disappointing shell of what could be a great game. That's about it. Let me know if you agree or disagree in the comments, if you want me to make more videos like this. And don't forget to like and subscribe.